Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I want to talk today about the sin of empathy. And I was a little taken back when I heard that this term has resurfaced. It's not a very new term. It's been in circulation, at least amongst some Christians now, for quite some time. But it resurfaced recently in view of the Episcopal Bishop Marianne Edgar Budde, who during the inaugural prayer service at Washington National Cathedral reached out to the president and those gathered there and reminded them that our God teaches us to be merciful and to remember that we once were all strangers. I thought her request to be merciful, her plea to show mercy to undocumented immigrants, the LGBTQI community, members of our society who are living in absolute terror and fear of being separated from their families, fear of their lives. I've got friends that I care about that are members of these communities who are living in absolute fear of their life right now. I was reminded of an essay that I read by Rabbi Irving Greenberg many years ago titled Cloud of Smoke, Pillar of Fire, Judaism, Christianity, and Modernity Post-Holocaust. And in that essay, Rabbi Greenberg reminds us, first of all, that both Judaism and Christianity are religions of redemption, and that every human being is of infinite value and should be redeemed. He developed a working principle that I have written in every single Bible that I own since I became aware of it. And the statement is simply this: no statement, theological or otherwise, should be made that would not be credible in the presence of the burning children. And then he asked them to consider whether or not they could stand and watch children being burned alive in fire until they were dead, and then tell them while they were being burned that they deserve it because of their sins. The statement is designed to cause us to scrutinize any belief system that's incompatible with sympathy, compassion, mercy, and empathy. And it invites us to put ourselves into the shoes of another person who is suffering. Now, once Bishop Budde made that statement at the National Cathedral, it received quite a bit of backlash. The president resorted to ad hominem attacks on her person, her presentation, her politics, and she, in an interview with Rachel Maddow, had expressed that many people wish she were dead. Ben Garrett on Twitter, a man who identifies himself as a Christian, a husband, a deacon at a church in Ogden, Utah, wrote on his Twitter account, or his X account, that we should properly hate this bishop in response because she hates God. She hates God's people. She is a snake, and your eyes shall not pity. That statement, your eyes shall not pity, is only found 3 times in the Old Testament. 2 of those times are with reference to an execution of a criminal that was to be carried out and done so without pity. The other reference is in Deuteronomy chapter 25, where it referenced cutting off the hands of a woman who intervened in a fight between 2 men by grabbing one of the guys by the genitals. Her hands were to be cut off, and your eyes shall show no pity. Now, personally, I think that people who categorize empathy as sinful, they simply fail to understand what empathy is. Empathy has been conceptualized over the years as feeling what another might be feeling. It is expressed in caring for another person. It's an invitation to imagine yourself in their shoes, what that must be like for them, and to feel that emotion, feel what it must be like for them. I think it's nefarious to suggest that it's sinful somehow to feel when somebody else is feeling because of their suffering. I think it is nefarious, and what they've done is they've committed some sort of semantic change in meaning in order to structure this ideology and create an irrational fear in the minds of people who might be moved by the suffering of other people to be very, very cautious, because in feeling what somebody else might be experiencing, you might be sinning against God, right? Depending on the circumstances. I think what they're saying when they manipulate people like that is that there is far more power in what contaminates us than in what cleanses us. There's nothing intrinsically sinful about your emotions and feelings. There is a variety of disciplines right now studying empathy, from philosophy to psychology to neuroscience. We are biologically hardwired to experience the feelings of other people when we are confronted by their suffering, and not to just walk away and imagine that they deserve what they're getting, because after all, they're just sinners and they've broken the law and they're doing things. Listen, people are not things to be conquered. They are human beings for us to love. And empathy and compassion and sympathy, they're just wings on the same bird. They're wings on the same bird. Compassion invites us to action. We're to advance towards the suffering of other people and to suffer together with them. Empathy just simply invites us to use our imagination for a few minutes and contemplate what it must be like to be in their shoes. Jesus wept, right? Shortest verse in the English translation of the Bible, and he did so at the graveside of a friend along with his family members. And I had a pastor tell me once, well, Jesus was just grieved over their unbelief and their lack of faith, and that's why he cried. He was just, listen, Jesus is not that fragile and insecure. Okay? He wept with them. They were hurting. He's not emotionally distant and emotionally blind to the suffering of other people. And none of us are called to be emotionally blind to the suffering of other people either. We are invited to love them. I recall another occasion in Matthew chapter 9 where Jesus was gathered at the table having a meal with tax collectors and sinners. And the Pharisees are the ones who came along and says, why are you keeping company with them? And Jesus says, those who are well don't need a physician. Those who are sick do. Go and figure out what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. In other words, I'm not going to sacrifice the people you think need to be sacrificed in the name of what you think is righteous. Go and figure out what it means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And he was quoting Hosea 6:6. By the way, Hosea married Gomer, a prostitute, right? And God desires us to be merciful. How can you be merciful? How can you be compassionate? How can you show sympathy to another person if you don't imagine yourself in their shoes and what their life must be like? You know, I'm reminded of several stories that I could probably tell you right now, but one really stands out to me. I have worked as a pastor, a hospice chaplain, child abuse and neglect investigator. I've been a probation and parole officer. I've worked with violent offenders, sex offenders, drug addicted clients. I've had to sit across the table from kids and interview them and have them tell me about where their mom or their dad keeps all the heroin in the house and how they are absolutely terrified that their mommy is going to die. I've had the misfortune of having to remove children from a home because it wasn't safe for them to be there any longer because of the choices, because of the environment in which those kids were being raised in by their parents. I remember one occasion I was out at a home and I sat across the table of a mother who had become drug addicted. She didn't actually live in the home. She was there visiting her children and her husband. She had been removed from the home by the husband because of her drug addiction. And I remember sitting there and having her tell me how she really, really wanted to be free. She had been sober for so long, and then circumstances happened. She was triggered and she used again. And almost overnight, she developed a mental health disorder from methamphetamine use. And I listened to her for a little while. Now, I could have gone into the home and just been very self-righteous and black and white and just had this posture of, well, you know, you are reaping what you sow. You deserve everything you're experiencing right now. But instead, I just sat there and listened to her. And I tried to put myself in her shoes for a few minutes. And I imagined her as a third grader, right? This is how I keep myself grounded in compassion and mercy when I'm confronted by somebody who is different from me, who lives differently, who made a series of choices in their life that were different from the choices I made, and it's causing them suffering and it's causing other people to suffer. I keep myself grounded by imagining them in the third grade, dreaming about what their life would be like. And then I remind myself, when I was in the third grade, I had dreams too. I bet they did. I bet they had hopes for how their life would turn out. So did I. And then I decided to look at that mother and I'd say, you had dreams when you were a kid. You had hopes. This is not the life you had hoped for. I'm not here to judge you. I know you love your children and your children love you and they are really worried about you. They have told me that you're just not the same. You're either depressed or you're raging or you're up all night or they can't wake you up in the morning to get help in preparation for school. About a week later, I was called back out to the house. This mom had overdosed and died. She died in the home in the presence of her children. They found her dead of a drug overdose. I decided to push back any visceral reaction that one might think I should have in the presence of such suffering, this posture of, well, they deserve it. They were just a drug addict. We shouldn't feel sorry for them. They made a choice to use. No, this is a person, if you've never sat with a drug addict, you don't know anything about how difficult it must be to get sober, right? These are people who may have made a choice in the beginning to use something, but now they can't make a choice to not use. They are terrified of an unassisted withdrawal, right? We beg them to go and get some help. They make phone calls. They try and get into a rehab. They try and get into the hospital. There's no open beds, and yet physiologically their body is demanding that next bump. They could die without an unassisted withdrawal, with an unassisted withdrawal. So they're terrified of that experience, and these people hate the fact that they ever started using drugs. They hate the fact that they have to use right now just to feel normal, and they hate what it's done to them. They hate what it's doing to their children. And every single time I sat and talked with a parent or a person who's drug addicted, and I ask them the question, what are you most worried about if nothing changes? They always say that my kids are going to grow up without me. I decided to push back any visceral reaction when I showed up to the house. I could hear the children and the father, an undocumented immigrant, inside the home sobbing and wailing and weeping. And I walked into the home and I went into the bedroom and I sat down with them and I couldn't help myself. I wept with them. I wept with them. Their hopes for the future had died. Their hopes had come crashing down. They were now separated from somebody that they loved and cared about very deeply. Was it sinful for me to weep with them? I don't think so. The people who refuse to feel sympathy and empathy, those are sociopaths and psychopaths. And the people that are telling you empathy is sinful right now have created some sort of semantic change and in a sense are trying to manipulate you into believing that it's sinful for you to feel sorry and to feel the experience of what undocumented immigrants and members of the LGBTQIA community must be experiencing right now in view of their future, in view of what their life looks like and what it could look like. They are trying to manipulate you in order to maintain some sense of boundaries and what's appropriate and who you should hate and who you shouldn't hate. And listen, Jesus said that we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. If you are in a church where they do not prioritize compassion and mercy and sympathy and encourage you to put yourself into the shoes of another person, you should leave. You should leave. Go find somebody. Go find somebody that prioritizes compassion and mercy and empathy and reinforces that through their teaching and through their example. Thanks so much for joining me. If you stayed tuned for this entire video, I appreciate you. If you like the content, please be sure to subscribe. Please leave a comment. Help me grow the channel. I'm brand new to all of this. I don't know what I'm doing, so I appreciate you. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.